Right. Buenos dias. Good morning. I need a little more energy. I know it's the last day. Buenos dias. Awesome. Thank you. So, really excited to be here. I've been talking to the few folks that I've met. It's my first time outside of a formal sort of professional development or conference setting that's not arts and culture based. So it's been really great to learn from all of the work that's happening across the country. I want to start out by saying that the organization that I work for doesn't traditionally use a resilience frame. And we don't, because most of the definitions that exist for community resiliency inherently ignore or don't account for the real racial, power, and cultural dynamics that are inherent in the way that things actually play out in place. And so for us, with this as a backdrop, I'll talk a little bit about my organization, and then I want to give you some dynamic examples of how our work is playing out across the country. So, ArtPlace is a 10-year partnership of 16 foundations, 8 federal agencies, and 6 banks. We launched in 2011, and as of 2020, December 31st in that year, we're all out of the job. And we knew that when we signed up. We're excited for it. We're spending down the resources that have been committed to our organization as an intermediary. Now, we've all come together because we realized that there was an opportunity to accomplish a really big, hairy goal, and that's to effectively position arts and culture as a core sector of all comprehensive community planning and development across the US. That's a lot of philanthropic jargon and doesn't mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So what that means to us is that we want to know when your table comes together as a community of leaders, when a mayor, a county commissioner, a governor calls a table together to plan for the future of a building, a block, a neighborhood, a town, a city, or a region, that in the same way there's always a seat at that table for whoever's planning for transportation, for whoever's planning for housing or the education system, or thinking about ag and food systems, we believe there should always be a seat at that table for the arts and culture community. Each of those individual sectors we believe are worthy of direct investment, and we believe that each of those around that table have a responsibility of investing in the goals of the others around the table. So, let's see if this is working. There we go. ArtPlace accomplishes its work through 3 primary approaches. We have 2 grant-making programs that make up our grant-making arm. We have a series of research strategies that are being deployed, and then, of course, field building, recognizing that as an organization that's both developing a field and exiting a field, that there's some interstitial tissue that needs to be built for the field of practice to continue beyond our existence. And I apologize, I have to have notes because I forget what I want to say. So I want to dive into the program that I have the privilege of overseeing, which is the National Creative Placemaking Fund. And in order to do that, I wanted to share one of the many frameworks that we've been able to develop over the last couple of years. We spent some time taking a look at the community development field, which is really made up of a bunch of different sectors that often don't know how to talk to each other and are encouraged in municipal, state, and county governments to actually work in really uncomfortable and unnecessary silos. So if you look along the y-axis, you'll see anybody who, if you look at your governmental offices, there's a director of economic development, there's a director of workforce development, there's whoever the chief of ag and food systems or the superintendent of schools. And as we took a look at the field, we recognized that there were 5 kinds of players that typically were working in this space. So you'll see along the top and the x-axis that we recognized there were commercial entities, civic, social, and faith-based organizations, of course, government, nonprofits, and all of us, philanthropy. And the program that I oversee is investing in projects across the United States that we're hoping will touch all 50 of these cells in different community contexts. For us, it's about being able to demonstrate how the deployment of arts and culture to address community development challenges and opportunities can accelerate our goals and can improve the outcomes to which we're aspiring. So, since 2011, we have deployed close to $67 million to 227 projects in 152 communities of all sizes within 43 states and the District of Columbia. We just did our panel last week, and we will likely be making an announcement in early December for another 26 projects that will touch an additional 2 states and 2 US territories. Fingers crossed all of that goes through. For us, there are a lot of changes that we had to go through over the last couple of years as the staff transitioned. And one of the major transitions that we made was to recognize that we get about 1,400 applications per year, and we only fund between 3 and 4% of those. So that's something we have to consider in the amount of work and time that we're asking for applicants to spend in getting our attention. So what we did first was to narrow our initial application that's open to the general public, as long as a project is happening in the United States, to these 4 questions. We ask, and yesterday in the morning session when we were talking about community engagement to affect policy, there was an engagement at the end that talked about how we define community. And in many cases, our programs are defining community by those that are marginalized, by communities that have been disinvested, by communities that are low income, or communities of affinity, whether they're by ethnicity or by race. For our program, one of the things that we understand is that we have to work on both sides of the equation if we're going to be successful. So we require people to define a community by geography. We are literally asking people to draw a circle on a map and talk about everyone and everything that works and lives and plays inside of that geography. We then require folks to go back to our matrix, if this will go back, and pick one of the sectors along the left-hand side. And we know that this is a false request, but I'll explain why we do this in a little bit. They have to pick one sector and then talk about, in the same way that Joe was explaining in his presentation, identify a community development challenge or opportunity that the community has decided that it wants to address. Not that an individual, not that a government, not that a corporation or a developer, but that literally there are a group of community leaders that have come together to determine that they want to take something on as a priority. And then we ask for how folks are deploying arts and culture. And I know that many of you around the room may be thinking that this is all about murals or public activation. And while those kinds of activities are certainly part of the creative placemaking practice, I'm going to give you some examples that complicate some of our base assumptions about the role that arts and culture can play in communities. But finally, the 4th question that we ask is, how do people know that change is happening? One of the things that's really important for us is that we are not experts in this work. We are learning and we are making mistakes as we go. It's really important for us to be able to deploy capital in a way that encourages people to try and to learn and to not be afraid of that learning as long as they're sharing it with us so that we can share it with the rest of the world. So all of the applicants that come to us get to pick their own indicators of success. They get to pick their own project period or funding period. They get to pick when their reports are due. And because we're incorporated as an LLC, we're able to deploy resources to individuals, to for-profits, to nonprofits, and figure out any kind of financial structure necessary in order to get capital into the hands of real community leaders. So I'm going to start with one quick example. I have 2 others. I don't know that I'll get through them, and maybe later in the Q&A we can talk about them. The first example I want to provide is of a small community of approximately 400. It's a small Inupiaq village off the northwest coast of Alaska on an island called Kivalina. Kivalina is one of the most amazing, beautiful places that I've had the pleasure and the blessing to get to travel to and spend several days in this community. So for 20 years, we've known that Kivalina is going underwater because of global warming. For 20 years, the federal government has tried to develop plans to work with the Navy Corps of Engineers to move this community and to determine where they should or should not go. Part of it because it is their fault that these individuals have developed a residence there. For those of you that are familiar with Native history in our culture, in our country, when education was made a requirement in Native communities, the federal government usually allowed one religion to go in and to manage that school as part of an acculturation and colonization process. For some reason, in this community of 400, they allowed 2 religions to enter, the Quakers and the Methodists. And so typically by familial factions, those 2 groups in that 400-member community do not get along. The federal government developed a plan for them to move, didn't do any community engagement, presented it back to the community rejected it. So they're stuck there. The state said, no, we have relationships. We will build a plan for them to move now that we have the study from the Navy Corps of Engineers, and they developed a plan and presented it back to the community. And again, the plan was rejected. So 5 years ago, 2 artists, one from Anchorage and one from Seattle, who have been huge international activists around global warming, decided to reach out to the tribal government and asked permission to go and build relationships and get to know what was happening in that place and what was the community doing. I'm not a big advocate of bringing in external resources to save or help a place, especially when it comes to arts and culture. Artists are one of the few resources that are in every single community. However, in addition to the factions that were built across religious lines, one of the other pieces that the state and the federal government did not recognize is that there's a tribal government and there's a town government. And again, through familial factions, they were not getting along or agreeing on the future of their community. This is a community of subsistence living. They're whaling and they are eating seal oil and seal meat. There's very little to any actual legal economy on this island. It is all through informal sources. So these two artists requested and received funding to do a couple of different things. They understood, first, how to bring these four factions together to get along through literally activating space and place through theater. They requested resources to rehab the existing community center as a place for artists to work with international engineers as part of the development strategy to plan for where will this community move to. But they realized there were some really urgent needs that needed to be handled right now. So these two artists are working with artists from the community to respond to the fact that nobody has running water in their house. People do not have toilets. They have what are called honeypots. They're 2.5-gallon Home Depot buckets with trash bags around them, and there's a really elaborate cultural system where middle schoolers and high schoolers will go and collect all of that waste on a daily basis. There's no place to remove it, so they throw it on one side of the island. And what happens in the thaw is kids like to play in water. And so literally there's a huge public health issue where children and families are engaging with public human waste. So these artists are working with engineers to develop an opportunity to create a portable sewer system, for lack of a better way to explain it, that will put a toilet in everyone's house. That toilet will separate liquid waste from solid waste. The liquid waste will evaporate. The solid waste will be pulled into a biochar reactor that will kill all of the human matter and create carbon bricks that can be used to heat homes in the winter. All of this in a process where they're doing archiving and understanding what were the processes that led to the different plans that had been developed. How do you make sure that you archive all of the cultural norms inside of this community center, and creating an opportunity to really understand the richness and the history of this culture as they think about what they want to take forward. Because even once the plan is completed, it's still going to take them another 10 to 20 years to raise the hundreds of millions of dollars that it will take to build the public infrastructure necessary for them to move. So these artists were visionary enough to disrupt some of the polarization that happens in small communities, to bring people together, to imagine new ways of responding to immediate needs and to addressing the impending need to be able to get off of this island. So I'm going to stop there because my time is up. There are two examples that I can talk about later. Actually, one of them that has to do with equitable TOD in Boston, but we can talk a little bit later. So I'm going to ask Tara to come on up.